Walt Kelly, Chris Sauer, and Mike Kennedy.
Good afternoon. My name is Walt Kelly. I live at 1026 West Howard. I own 80 acres of land around Minnesota City. I have served on the Winona County Soil and Water Conservation Board, worked on various ag-related projects with the Winona JCs and the Chamber of Commerce. I worked in dairy cattle nutrition and sold ag-related products, including fertilizers, for over 20 years. Someone once commented that carefully defining the problem is 50% of getting to the solution. So, what is the problem? Is it the total number of cows in one group? If so, then is the solution determining the maximum number of inter-cow relationships that is healthy? I doubt it. Is the problem manure? I doubt it. Manure has been recognized as essential to soil since the beginning of agriculture. Is the problem the amount of manure that can be properly used to replace the nutrients used by the farmer's crop? I believe that this is the problem. So, what is the solution? Soil testing will tell how much nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, micronutrients are needed to properly feed the planned crop. Of course, the region's karst topography must be factored in around sinkholes, but they are a minor problem of this farm's total acreage. Now, if there should be more manure available than is needed by the crops on this farm, they have agreements to give or sell manure to neighbors. Consideration must be given to how much nitrogen in the water is the legacy of too much fertilizer placed too close to sinkholes in the past. That is history. It is not a solution to the issue today. I urge the county to allow this well-planned expansion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Chris Sauer, Mike Kennedy, Gary Haim.
Hello, Chris Sauer, 22482 Ruprecht Valley Road, Lewiston, Minnesota. I am a hog farmer, so that 20 years ago that was a four-lettered word already, hogs. My brother and I farm together, a multi-family farming operation. We also have another small business. I want to talk to you about the animal cap 1,500 unit issue, because the history of that whole unit, how that number came about, is got no science behind it. So after we built our first facility and we got permitted through the state of Minnesota in 1995, and that's about when Daly started up on their facility. Our second facility, we came to Winona County and we worked with Winona County and the MPCA to get permitted. But by that time, there were some groups that were pretty fired up about this big animal expansion in Winona County. There was a few other hog barns, the Dalys and us. So after that site was permitted, the second site, the commissioners put a group of us together to study feedlot issues. I think there was 10 or 12 of us. Mr. Knope was part of the group. And we were all appointed by the commissioners, so there wasn't any special weighted group of people in this committee. So we had different experts come in. We met once a month for 2.5 years, I think. Our goal was to come up with an animal unit limit or number. So Winona County is the lowest number in the state of Minnesota, I believe, as far as an animal unit cap. And there's no science behind it. A certain group of the people in that committee wanted 300 animal units, and the rest of us were pushing for 3,000. The compromise became 1,500 animal units. If we'd have went with the 300 animal units back in 1998 or 99, whenever this ordinance was put in, livestock would just about be extinct in Winona County now, if you look at the dairies and the operations that are left. So I don't know if that's what Winona County is looking for or not, but there's no science behind this 1,500 animal unit. So I ask you to, you say you're trying to protect this ordinance. This ordinance has no science, no reasoning behind it. Just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Mike Kennedy, Gary Haim, and then Dale Hines.
Mike Kennedy, 316 West 7th Street in Winona. I'd like to thank the board for their public service and remind them that both personally held values and educating yourself is not a sign of bias. The current Winona County zoning ordinance specifically states 8 criteria that must be met by any applicant for Winona County feedlot variance. The Board of Adjustment evaluation of the request includes the satisfaction of all 8 qualifications are fully met by the applicant. This process was developed primarily to be used in a situation such as this one. Since Daily Farms of Lewiston is already in excess of the animal unit cap, via being grandfathered in as non-conforming, and they have stated primarily economic reasons repeatedly for this massive expansion that would be far beyond the intent of the current limits of the ordinance. That makes criteria number 1, the variance request, in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance, and criteria number 4, the variance request is due to special conditions or circumstances unique to the property, not created by the owners of the property since enactment of the ordinance. Both are impossible to meet. I am confident that as a board, you have the expertise to judge correctly and decide in the interests of our county and its future of appropriate land use. The days are rapidly approaching when the future long-term economic viability of a community will be based on their still healthy natural resources. Too often in today's continuous expansion theories of big business, the assets of a community or region are exploited to the point of collapse, leaving far degraded and unrepairable resources. An opportunity for conservation of public resources, ensuring a quality of life here in Winona County that is based on a safe and healthy environment for all, should be rightfully taken at every instance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Gary Haim, Dale Hines, and Lori Krause.
My name's Gary Haim, currently at 1812 Pleasant View Lane, Winona. I'm a small businessman in the area of the Dailies. No affiliation, but I have had the opportunity to see how they operate. I've worked for many of the smaller farms in the areas, and when this conversation comes up, oftentimes water quality comes up, and when I see the smaller unregulated farms out there and what the Dailies are willing to do as far as being the most regulated dairy in the state, it makes sense to me to allow this. If I think about the fact that they could just split up and each of them have 400 cow farms in different little spots and be unregulated, those cows are going to drink the same amount of water. Actually, they'll use more water because they won't be able to afford nice facilities that they're reusing the water that they have, reclaiming it. It just seems like if they're willing to go through everything that's been asked as far as regulations go, I don't see any reason why not to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Dale Hines, Lori Krause, and then Sharon Ormsby.
Hi, I'm Dale Hines, 12215 County Road 129 Southeast, Eota, Minnesota. And I know that's Olmsted County, but we're just a few miles from the Winona County border. So I've worked in agribusiness for the last 35 years in Winona County, and I've worked with the Dailies for the last 20 years. And a lot of these points have been covered by Mr. Berger and Ben already, but I just wanted to highlight them. This agriculture and dairy is really not a one-size-fits-all opportunity. It's, it builds on what their experience was. The Dailies have gradually grown over the years. Sure, they're a lot bigger than a lot of farms, but they've just gradually grown and built up to the size that they are. So I really feel they can handle it. Number two, being involved in our local economic development authority as a volunteer, I see the benefits of this expansion, and I really feel that it's important for the economic viability of rural Winona County and the Lewiston area. And then lastly, working with the Dailies for that amount of time, I know they will always try to do the right thing, and regardless of a bump in the road that was mentioned earlier, I know that they've always tried hard to make sure that things are good. So I really believe that they can handle what's going on and will do a good job even with this larger facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori Krause, then Sharon Ormsby, then Michael Meeker.
Hello, my name is Lori Krause and I live at 713 Main Street in Winona, Minnesota. I was born and raised in Winona, and although we moved away for about 10 years, we chose to move back to this area to raise our family. And in fact, we own the home that I grew up in. I'm here today in support of respecting the Winona County ordinance of the animal unit cap, which was thoughtfully and carefully developed to protect the safety of all citizens. I have never lived on a farm, so in thinking about this request, I chose to relate it to the issue of myself as a landowner in this county. The Daly Farms are asking to increase their animals by approximately 4 times the cap. If you compare that to a landowner who owned a home with 4 apartments certified for 2 occupants each, asking to increase that to 4 times or 32 people living in one home, that would never be permitted. Or if a landowner is allowed to have 12 hens in their backyard and requests permission to have 4 times that many, or 48 hens, that would never be permitted. We live in the driftless area where resources are precious and the laws were carefully and thoughtfully put into place to protect all the citizens in the county. It is your responsibility to uphold the laws for the safety and protection of all citizens. I ask that you respect the cap that is currently in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Krause. Sharon Ormsby, then Michael Meeker, Amy Cordry.
I'm Sharon Keefe Ormsby. I grew up on a farm. I live in town right now, but I lived 50 years in the country. And I grew up on a small farm in Houston County. And I remember being able to drink out of the streams, and get fish from the creeks. And of course, we can't do that anymore. I also remember in 2007 when we had a 20-inch rainfall on this valley, and it practically wiped out our house. It didn't exactly, but it was about an inch from it. So what I'm saying is that you don't know when then another 20-inch thing, and what will it do to this expansion? I don't know. The other thing is that I wonder a little bit about pesticides used to grow all this alfalfa. It doesn't grow by itself. We didn't talk about anything of pesticides or whatever that is. I also wonder if 3 times the cows that they expect, where do they go? How do they do it? It's huge. It's huge. I visited the farm last month where I grew up, and across from our farm was a nice farm, and it did not impact the neighbors. They kept it with the
Thank you, Ms. Ormsby. Michael Meeker, Amy Cordry, then Bob Reddig.
I'm Michael Meeker. I live in Gilmore Valley. I've been here since 1977. I want to thank the board for going through this and all you're doing. You get paid well for this, I'm sure. I'm very impressed also with the strong feelings of the Daly Farm, and I want them to know that I understand that they want to do the best for their family and involve them in their operation. But I also think that we have to consider the whole county, and I'm not convinced that we know exactly what we're doing when we expand like this. All the arguments that have been made so far about the use of water and the expansion of cows and the manure injection and so on affects me because we have a well and we drink from that well. And I know that many good arguments have been made that the new scientific technologies will handle all this. It's just that I don't know. I think there is a risk. We can't know what it's going to do to us. And finally, we have in place a cap, and my initial reaction to this proposal was, how can we expand at this rate and call it a variance? This seems to me many, many more times than it would be if it were just a variance. What does variance mean? How do you grant a variance? When I've had to get a variance from the county, it's been a very small increment, not something like this. Thank you very much for letting me speak. This is very intimidating.
Yes, we know. Thank you, Mr. Meeker. Amy Cordry, Bob Reddig, Stephen Len, I think.
Amy Cordry, 26006 County Road 9, Winona. I'm a lifelong Winona resident, and I've lived on a farm in Cedar Valley for 40 years with my husband, and for a while my son, till he grew up and moved away. I would like to state a fact, just the facts, ma'am. When I became involved in this issue, there were so many feelings. I met the Dailies. I toured their farm. They were very welcoming, but then there were facts, and so I had to go for facts. And one of the facts in the MPCA EAW pertaining to the use of the amount of water requested, in the EAW, the MPCA states that it may very possibly impact surrounding waters, streams, wetlands, springs, etc. So that is a fact. The MPCA stated that. So it's not that there's not going to be an impact. It's not that there is going to be an impact, but there's a possibility. Then I want just the facts. Variance ordinance number 2 says it has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, which supports agriculture, which is true. But it also states as a goal, maintain, protect, and improve the quality of groundwater resources. And I just want you to be aware that those facts that were stated about the violations, I have the original documents for those. You cannot deny the facts that these large farms have a very difficult time controlling their manure and the pollution that that causes. We know that because the data is on the wells in that area. It may be going down, but it is still not healthy. And so because of the ordinance that states the variance request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, it is not. The comprehensive plan asks for water protection.
Thank you, Ms. Cordry. Bob Reddig, Stephen Len, and Delos Schmitt.
Bob Reddig, 24450 Gilmer Valley Road on Garvin Heights, Wilson Township, Winona County. I certainly appreciate what the Dailies want to do, but I think the economic well-being of the whole county is more important. In the January 31st, 2019 Agri-News article in Salem, Oregon, a bankrupt dairy was in receivership and nobody wanted to take care of the 47 million gallons of manure stored there. And if bigger is always more efficient, which is very possibly true, then we also have the problem is that in Olmsted County or somewhere else where you don't have a cap, someone can start a dairy for 30,000 cows, and there are ones like that, which will put Dailies out of business pretty quickly, which is a few thousand. And so also, so in the process of them being more efficient, and I know how economics work, that can also put some of my neighbors up on the ridge out of business. Just as one former speaker talked about going out of business now, I don't know how many cows he had, but he probably will not be planting alfalfa anymore. So that probably will be more erosion coming down into Pleasant Valley or wherever it is. The biggest thing is when you change the rules in the middle of the game, and this variance would do that. Other farmers have planned their whole lives and their own processes that they've grown in other parts of the county. Lewiston is not the whole county. So other farmers have planned all along how they plan, and so this would really disrupt those plans. And then finally, to get to the crux of it, if the variance on such, this is a very shaky grounds, which is pretty obvious, common sense, some would say, but if it's approved, then that sets a precedent for other variances. I might want to put a landfill up here in Garvin Heights, but I wouldn't ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rettig. Stephen Lynn, Delos Schmitt, and Jim Clark. All right. Delos Schmitt, then Jim Clark, and then Doug Knope.
My name is Delos Schmitt, and I'm president of the Winona Chamber of Commerce. Each year, the Chamber hosts an event called Family Night on the Farm. Why? Because we recognize the importance of the family farm to this county's economic health. Further, we recognize that many people have no idea how farms operate. The Night on the Farm event celebrates ag industry while drawing attention to the environmental stewardship practices in use every day on farms throughout this county. Unfortunately, our family farms do not feel celebrated or valued. They have to fight to correct the grievous misinformation that's out there regarding their family farming practices. This should not be. We should be drawing attention to the realities facing our farmers. The simple reality that in order to survive, family farms must be able to generate enough revenue to pay their bills. It's simple business concept. Winona County has set an arbitrary animal unit cap not based on science that limits the opportunities for farmers to support their families and for them to get a return on investing in new technology. If we want the best environmental protection available, we must provide an atmosphere that encourages and rewards farmers for making those investments. Previous speaker Matt Berger has already laid out the point-by-point supporting facts for each of the 8 criteria by which the Board of Adjustments must consider when making its determination. It is the opinion of the Winona Chamber that the daily variance request more than satisfies the necessary criteria. Further, it is the position of the Chamber that good governance is fair and predictable governance. All businesses, regardless of their industry, should be able to approach the permitting and variance request with a degree of confidence that if they play by the rules, if they meet, or as in the case of the dailies, exceed the requirements, that their application will be looked upon favorably. The variance request before you today should be met with your vote to approve.
Thank you, Ms. Schmitt. Jim Clark, Doug Knope, William Richardson.
Jim Clark, 391 Dresser Drive, Winona. I represent a group called Windcrest Trout Unlimited. We have a great trout fishing resource in this area, and I just wanted to make the board aware that we're not exactly starting from a state of purity. The great preponderance of our streams and waterways are already placed on an impaired basis by the MPCA, which means they have an overage of various pollutants and they don't support the aquatic life that they're supposed to. The other thing is that to a trout fisherman or trout guy, manure is really scary. Manure entering a stream, the ammonia in it absorbs the oxygen, and any organisms that live in it suffocate and die. And that's always a big risk. We're just hoping that we'll be able to control this manure situation because there's going to be a lot of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug Knope, William Richardson, Joe Richardson.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. I'm Doug Knope, 29440 County Road 17. I'm speaking personally. I also work at the Land Stewardship Project. We've got 400 members in the county who are deeply concerned about the future of this county. This proposal does not meet the criteria for a variance. The economics has been used overridingly in the Daily's own reports and plans as the dominant reason for this variance, and that's not a reason to grant a variance. A variance is supposed to be a small deviation from the rule. This is not a small deviation. This proposal fundamentally will change the structure of agriculture in Winona County if it's approved. There are countless studies that show the negative impact of large-scale farm consolidation on other farms, on other rural businesses, and on the rural community itself. And I'll leave you with a summary of those studies in the box here below. Dairy farmers are facing very difficult financial pressures. We all know that, with corporate-run agricultural co-ops squeezing the very farmers they're supposed to protect. This proposal is a symptom of that problem, with family farms not being protected. It's not a solution to this problem. This request is not a variance from the ordinance. If granted, this request really shatters the ordinance. Please protect the cap and vote down this request. And in closing, I just want to mention the water quality in Utica Township. 2016, the Minnesota Department of Ag said wells were at 46% over the drinking water standard. 2017, 19% over the drinking water standard. Let's find out why that variation occurred. I don't think it was because the aquifer has been improved that much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knope. William Richardson, Jill Richardson, Angela Baker.
Yeah, hi, I'm Bill Richardson. I live at 2 Washington Street in Winona. I've got a bunch of letters behind my name too, but that's something else. My background is in aquatic ecology and biogeochemistry, so I've looked at these issues for a long time professionally. And I'm not a farmer, and I really appreciate the efforts farmers go through to keep their material out of the streams and groundwater. But systems fail. Manure pits fail. You know, groundwater is a precious commodity that once it's contaminated, it's hard to clean up. It's almost impossible to clean up. So, you know, despite all the efforts that these farms put in place, groundwater that gets contaminated cannot be cleaned up. And rivers and streams contribute to the health of larger rivers and streams downstream. And despite the best efforts of the USDA and best management practices, we still have an increasing size of the Gulf of Mexico hypoxic zone. So we have evidence that the best efforts of agriculture to protect our streams and groundwater are not working that well. So I urge you to keep the cap in place as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Jill Richardson, Angela Baker, Amelia Voss.
That was Bill Richardson, and I'm Jill Richardson at 2 Washington Street in Winona. I'm the other half of him. I don't have the background and the letters after my name that he does, but I do agree with everything that he said, of course. But I look at this, as I grew up in a small rural town in Iowa, in Webster County, Iowa. And I spent my days with my brother and friends playing in the stream, Skillet Creek, that went around our town. And there were crawdads, and there were minnows, and there were shiners, and there were tadpoles. And it was crystal clear. And through the years of my lifetime, large animal confinements came into the area. That stream went through my father's valley that he owned. And he was very involved with environment and nature. And we just watched that stream deteriorate to where there's no life there anymore. And I think of my grandchildren and how life has changed for them. And I just think you need to respect the cap and leave it alone. Our environment has to come first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Richardson. Angela Baker, Amelia Voss, Caleb Storm. Hi, Amelia Voss, Caleb Storm, and Johanna Ruprecht.
Hi, I'm Amelia Voss, and I'm an attorney with the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. I'm an attorney that specializes in environmental and agricultural law. I would just like to clarify a few things that Mr. Berger stated in his presentation earlier today. First and foremost, I want to clarify that the Land Stewardship Project and Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy do not have an active lawsuit against Daly Farms. That's a mischaracterization of the legal action. I should know because I filed it. The legal action is an appeal of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's decision to deny an further environmental review of this project. And the appeal is simply asking the Court of Appeals to determine whether that decision was consistent with the law. So, to be clear, it's not a lawsuit against the Dailies. They can participate if they choose to, and they have, but it is simply asking to review the decision of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I've also authored a memorandum that's in your packet submitted on behalf of Land Stewardship Project, and that memo discusses the legality of the Daly Farms variance request as it applies to the variance criteria. And in that memo, I conclude that their application does not meet 7 of the 8 variance criteria. And I'm not going to go into that in depth, but I would like to highlight a couple points for you. And I think the main point is, with regard to the first criteria, consistency with the ordinance, there's a section on purpose in 3.2.1 that says it's the intent of this ordinance that all nonconformities be gradually eliminated and brought into conformity. And they're asking for a variance from that chapter as well. And so when you think about whether this proposal is consistent with the ordinance, you need to think about the stated purpose of chapter 3.2.1. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Voss. Caleb Storm, Johanna Ruprecht, and Carrie Tweetin.
Hello, my name is Caleb Storm. I live here in Winona. I grew up on a family farm over in Westby, which is about an hour away from here. It was a dairy farm, so I have the experience. I've lived it for many years. I've also had other experiences working for different companies here and there that I've been on hundreds of farms throughout the state of Wisconsin and Minnesota. And I can tell you that having been on Daly's farms recently, that they have one of the best managed farms that I've ever seen. From anything from their dairy to the manure separation, it's all done by the book and very well. Their manure management plan is sensitive to their environment and to their neighbors. You wouldn't know that they're spreading manure if you don't see it, because they are knifing it in, they're injecting it. They're putting the correct amounts where the ground needs it, not just throwing it out on the field closest to the farm just because it's quick and easy. Media and social activist groups have continued to put dairy ag in a bad light, and their farmers are some of the most caring and sensitive people out there, responsible. Without them, there'd be no food. The Dailies are a farm operation with multi-generational involvement. They deserve the opportunity to expand and the support of the community. We continue to hear about the water manure issues, and they're really not at hand here. The MPCA took care of that. Specifically to the water, though, it doesn't disappear just because they use it. As I said, it's used time and time again and returned to the ground through natural process. And what does it matter if there's separate farms that are all milking 400 cows? They're all going to spread the manure on the acres, except the smaller farms aren't going to have the regulation that the Dailies are putting themselves through. So the ordinance says that economics can't be the only reason for the variance. However, it could be a portion of it. If you look at the community, their jobs, the family, and the environment, there are all other factors that support this approval of the variance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Storm. Johanna Ruprecht, Carrie Tweetin, and Wayne Ode, or Odie.
I'm Johanna Ruprecht. I live at 460 East Mark Street in Winona. The family farm I grew up on is at 18828 County Road 20 in Lewiston, within sight of the Daly Farm operation. I'm speaking on my own behalf, but I am also proud to be an organizer with the Land Stewardship Project based in our office in Lewiston. I believe that the Daly operation should not be granted a variance. It clearly does not meet the majority of the criteria. It is not in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance. It is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. It's certainly not reasonable under criteria number 7. This is already the largest dairy operation in southeast Minnesota. It would be, with this expansion, in the top 5% of dairy farms by size in the state of Minnesota. And 4,600 cows in one place on top of karst topology is simply not reasonable by any real definition. And the thing is, because of my family background, the way that we farm, I know that it is more than possible for families to raise to make a good living raising livestock in ways that are completely in harmony with our ordinance and our comprehensive plan by following the laws of Winona County. And we can make a good living doing that, and we can raise good food for our communities. That's what my family does, and that's what so many other farmers in this community and in the state of Minnesota are doing. So we know that it's possible. We know that there are ways to farm and be successful at farming while respecting the common good, respecting the laws, respecting what's right for the whole community. And some folks have said, you know, if the Dailies are willing to do everything they're asked of, or they're following the rules, they should get their variance, but they're not willing to do everything that's asked because they're not willing to stay within our 1,500 animal unit cap. I just don't believe that one family has any more right to farm than any other family does. I think it's an issue of simple math. We can either have bigger farms or we can have more farms. And I'd rather live in a community where we have more farms, and that means we have to put an upper limit on how big farms can get. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ruprecht. Carrie Tweetin, Wayne Odie, and this might be Ellsworth Gerard.
Carrie Tweetin, 19725 Trestle Drive, Lewiston, 55952. I farm with my wife and kids and my wife's parents. We dairy farm. As like Dailies, the fingerprints, along with other dairy farms, big and small, touch thousands every day. Being a dairy farmer and a neighbor to Dailies, I agree with this quote. Year after year, activists, environmentalists, celebrities, and politicians continue to turn folks against farmers. Fear sells. Truth is lost in the sea of opinions and agendas. As the dream of our children being able to farm fades, we continue to fight. We fight for what we know is right. We fight for this amazing way of life. We fight to continue to play our small role in feeding this growing population. We fight because we know what we do is important and matters. We fight for truth, and we fight for our children, the next generation of farmers. Dailies are no different. We are environmental stewards of the land because our farms are the next generation's farms. All are driven to help employ technologies and innovations on their operations to create on-farm efficiencies, conserve natural resources, foster healthy communities, and preserve the family farm for generations to come. We support the Dailies. Dairy in general and their community, and which is our community, is at the heart of what we do and the heart of who we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Wayne Ode, Ellsworth.
Simon.
Really?
Yeah.
Sorry. And Rich McRoot.
My name is Wayne Odie. I live in St. Charles, 11613 Highway 14. I had some things I wanted to say, but most of my concerns have already been stated. All I can say is I think we should keep the variance in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Ellsworth Simon, Rich McRoot, and Kyle Black.
I'm Ellsworth Simon, 19744 Highway 14. I live 1 mile east of the Daily setup. I've lived and farmed all my life as neighbors to Dailies. This last year I replaced my pressure tank on my water system, and I've been drinking water out of that same well since 1939. Dailies have been need to upgrade their farming operation like any other business. They are lucky they are able to include a large number of their own family, and so this is not a one-man operation. This is a multiple family operation, and I feel that it is necessary for them to upgrade both their equipment and their operation. I served on the Whitewater Watershed Committee a number of years ago, and they told us how they ran the Crystal Springs fish hatchery. Several years ago, they had a fish kill there. They blamed it on the farmers. It was not the farmers' fault. It was their incompetency in running that fish hatchery. They did the same thing to Jim Cady at Peterson, and that was many years ago, and they had to shut down that fish hatchery. I feel that you should allow them to this operation, and I will talk to many farmers that have been monitored by the PCA, and the municipalities were the #1 polluter of our water systems, and farmers were last. They, in fact, have found more pollution off of government land than they did off of the farmer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. We have Rich Mickroot, Kyle Black, Lori Laporte.
Thank you. My name is Rich Mickroot. I live at 1355 Grandview Court in the city of Goodview. Post office is Minnesota City. Listened to a lot of testimony today, and there's a lot of strong points from both sides, but one thing I really have not been hearing much about, outside the city of Winona, agriculture is our largest industry in the county. And I don't think we're really paying much attention to that, and I did not hear any mention about our food supply. These people and all their neighbors and whatever are the ones that stock our grocery stores. Most of us do not grow our own foods. We have to go to a grocery store and buy our food. And we still demand very low price food. For a lot of reasons. There's a lot of subsidies for our food supply. And also we're talking about the demise of the small family farm. That's true of almost every industry in our country today. Where did the small grocery store go? Where did the corner gas station go? A lot of it we've either over-regulated or taxed the small person out of business. Just comply with regulations, and the cost today that you put on the overhead cost of a business today is tremendous, and a small business cannot handle that overhead pressure today, and that's why the small business person is going out of business and is being replaced by larger businesses that can generate the capital to comply. Thank you very much. I hope you make the decision to approve the variance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mike. Kyle Black, Lori Laporte, and Dick Dahl. All right, Lori Laporte, Dick Dahl, Judy Ellenhusen. Okay. Then after Judy will be More Young and Brent Johnson.
Hi, I'm Judy Ellenhusen, 16702 County Road 31, Altura. I grew up on a farm all those years ago. I'm still farming. We still have a dairy. Our grandchildren are the 7th generation in our family farm. I have no qualms about you approving this variance for Daly's. We have no thought that their having the farm they want is going to affect our grandchildren if they want to farm. So I would appreciate it if you would consider approving this variance. Thank you.
Thank you. More Young, Brent Johnson, and Don Brown.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. My name is Brent Johnson. I'm not a member or a resident of Winona County. I have been actively involved in agriculture for 52 years, which does date me, by the way. I was born on a small dairy farm. For the past 20 years, I've worked with two of the world's largest alfalfa research and breeding companies. During the 20 years, I spent 6 years lobbying and educating legislatures, which is no easy job on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., on the benefits of the use of alfalfa and forages in a dairy system. Part of our education process was to ensure that the alfalfa and forages received a fair amount for research and development in cropping systems. And so I heard some of the benefits mentioned earlier. One that has been missed is that the use of alfalfa instead of traditional corn or soybeans in a rotation system can reduce erosion by up to 90%. And so I would strongly encourage anyone using more alfalfa or forages that is one tremendous benefit in a cropping system. The other word that came to mind today was diversity. Not diversity in the way that the popular press has been using it over the last couple days, but maybe diversity in farming systems. And so diversity means embracing all types, right? Something different than what we think should be normal. So whether embracing ag systems, regardless of whether it's organic, perhaps it's farm to fork, perhaps it's purchasing your vegetables or milk locally, or perhaps it's a farm that uses large-scale, efficient ag production. One thing I find disappointing is the groups not working together in this area rather than seem to be polarizing. So I encourage you to approve the variance.
Thank you. Don Brown, Paul Wotska, Tom Kujawa.
My name is Don Brown. I live in Goodview. Been down here for 13 years. Came from East Central Minnesota, where there used to be dozens of farms, and there might be 2 left in Chisago County. And I'd like to commend the Daley's family. In working in family businesses my whole career, I commend them for, I'm sure it's been trying times with many family members, but I like to commend them for wanting to expand and do the right thing and progress. I've been involved with the MPCA over my 40-year career in permitting similar situations in gravel pits throughout Minnesota, and I would encourage you to look at the findings of the MPCA. I have yet to find a permitted facility not in compliance after, or they've never made a mistake of their work, of their diligence when they're doing their permitting process. You need to go by what they do. They're the professionals, and go by their recommendations to approve this variance for the Daleys. And one more thing, in America today, our infrastructure is getting to be less and less owned by American families or American companies. Again, I commend the American family, the Daleys. The cement industry alone is 90% owned by foreign because of our regulations and our smaller companies getting bought up by non-American companies. So I encourage you to approve this variance and let a great American company, a great American farm continue to grow in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Wotska, Tom Kujawa, and Bonnie Wachinski.
My name is Paul Wotska, and I live at 13226 North Highway 74 in Altura, and I want to thank the Board of Adjustment for at least sticking through speaker number 45. I'm here representing the Minnesota Well Owners Organization. We go by the acronym MNWO. MNWO's mission is to provide education and technical services to those who own private wells and those who rely on private wells for their drinking water. We also work to preserve, protect, and restore Minnesota's water resources. My comments are directed to criterion number 5 in your list. Specifically, essential characteristics of western Winona County, one of them is its geology. That is, the geology is characterized by shallow depth bedrock, high number of sinkholes, very high sinkhole probability, and high susceptibility to pollution from all land use activities. Another essential characteristic of western Winona County is its water resources, specifically the Prairie du Chien Jordan Aquifer. The Prairie du Chien Jordan Aquifer is a gift of abundant, good-tasting water for all the people of this county. You can no longer drill a well into the Prairie du Chien. The well code forbids it. It is because it is too susceptible to contamination. Since the 1960s, we have seen the contamination of municipal wells in Lewiston, Utica, and Bethany. And we can argue about whether there's 20% or 80% of the wells in Utica Township that are currently above the health risk standards, but we can agree that there is extensive pollution in that aquifer. The south branch of the Whitewater is also polluted. We ask that you deny this variance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wotska. Tom Kujawa, Bonnie Wachinski, Al Butenhoff.
Bonnie Wachinski, 1759 West 5th Street in Winona. I've listened to a lot of speakers today, and I've received a lot of education. And I did learn many good things about the daily farm practices, but I still think there is room for improvement. And when they come and ask for a huge increase in number of animals, a larger number of wells, I think that some of the problems which they have not yet addressed should be addressed before such a large expansion. Now, we also heard previous speakers saying that the area has very poor water quality, Utica and the St. Charles, or that area especially. I don't see that expanding so greatly is going to improve water quality. The nitrate pollution, and they mentioned also here today the past record of poor handling of manure products affecting the runoff and the pools and so forth, and then the possibility of great, we've seen great snowfalls, but we could also have great rainfalls, and those could be exacerbated. The problems with those manure pools could be exacerbated. And so while I do see many good things in the daily farm practices, I think that there's room for improvement before they go on to enlarging. I would say that we should stay with the cap and continue good practices as far as possible.
Thank you. Al Butenhoff, Reve's Sites and Don Sites.
Good afternoon. Al Butenhoff, 20997 County Road 23. Been a farmer all my life in this area. I'm about 8 miles from the daily farm operation. And first of all, I'd like to thank the LSP members on the board for taking all the questions to the extreme that they did. And I think the questions should have been spread out a little bit more to the rest of the board members. I think they got, and thank you for taking all those questions. The daily farm expansion does pose a real environmental problem in the area. I'd like to see my grandkids thrive in a pollution-free environment. And I'm real afraid if things continue on with the expansions like they are in Winona County, this isn't going to happen. I don't believe God in His creation wanted things like this to happen to this degree when he created the earth. And I guess another thing that I'm a little concerned about is the manure situation. There's supposed to be 4,000 acres where they're going to be spreading manure, and to what extent are all those acres going to be maintained for an extended period of time? There's going to have to be a lot of things get written down here, or this is going to be a real hazard. So please consider all these things and vote no against the variance. Thank you.
Thank you. Revese Seitz, Don Seitz, and Joanne Thomas. Emily Falk, Liz Wilson, and Frank Yakish.
I'm Frank Yakish. I'm from 165 East 4th Street, Winona. Let me point out that there was a different type of ground seep than just a sinkhole. Assuming that they are in places in the landscape where they are recessed with trees popping halfway up. That's what we call sinkholes, not so. Actually, these are what is known as dolines, usually located on the divides of between valleys. Similarly, there are cutters, such as those you can see on the way up 43 to Wilson in the quarry there. There's many, you can see dozens of them in that little quarry. The sinkholes we talk about are collapses of the ceilings of caverns, and correctly gives us the feeling that a tractor might fall into one. Usually they're small. I heard of one in Rochester, in a driveway in the city of Rochester. It seems to me that given all of the criteria, just keep between the divides and the steep slopes. Thank you.
Thank you. Donna Common, Dick Lederber, and Brad Benke. So, Vance Haugen, Mark Johnson, and Harvey Benson.
Hello, I'm Harvey from Harmony, 31089 120th Street, a couple of miles south of town. I was born in the house on the farm where I'm living today. My mother was also born there in a different year. But you folks there, you can't see the sign that I've been looking at most. I've been listening to everything, but I've been a community of learners improving our world, Winona State University. The key word there, I think, is improving our world. And as I look at that, I think, okay, if this expansion would go forward, would your lives be improved? Whose lives would be improved? How would they improve? I think this is something to think about very carefully and very seriously. The residents of Winona County, Winona City, and the rest of us around here. How are we going to be improved, and who is going to be improved? Please think carefully, and for another 50 seconds. It's important we ponder this issue. Thank you for this democratic forum, which is a part of our country.
Thank you, Mr. Benson. It actually was kind of nice to have that little smile. So that's the last name on the list. And so now I need to ask 3 times, is there anyone else who has not spoken who would like to speak for or against this petition? Is there anyone else who would like to speak for or against this petition? Is there anyone else who would like to speak for or against this petition? Do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. It was moved by Phil, seconded by Larry. So the public hearing is now closed. I believe there will be a time after this for, briefly we hope, comments from Mr. Daly. Do we want to take a break before that? Right, well, so...
Is there a way to get it just a little warmer in here? Yeah. Maybe that'll start here now. I'm cold. When did we take the break last? At 4 o'clock. 3 o'clock. So it's almost. I think we should take a break.
Okay, we've decided we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back, and if Mr. Daly has a few comments, that would be fine, and then we'll begin our discussion. Thank you. So, Mr. Daly, if you would, there's an opportunity for you to respond if you so choose. We hope it won't be redundant, but this is your opportunity if you like. Oh, good.
Thank you. Again, my name is Matt Berger. I just want to touch on a couple of points from the comments, and then we'll turn it over to Ben briefly to wrap up here. Number one, there was some discussion or suggestion about following the law, abiding by the ordinance. Granting a variance where the intent and purpose of the ordinance are followed and the criteria are met is following the law. So just because you grant a variance does not mean that you are not following the law, and that suggestion is just wrong. Number two, there's been some talk, some questions, some concerns about the impact that this expansion would have on other smaller farms in the area. Dairy farms do not compete in a vacuum. Daily Farm is not competing with their neighbor down the road. They are competing in a global marketplace. And the expansion of this dairy, while it is significant here in the scheme of the dairy economy and the dairy marketplace, it is minuscule. There are numerous dairies in Minnesota that are far larger than this dairy will be after the expansion. And when you go to western states, they make the ones even in western Minnesota look tiny. So this expansion is not going to have a significant impact on other smaller dairies. The Daly family can expand and prosper, as can other existing dairies. Third, and finally, on the environmental impact or potential impact of this, there's been a lot of generalization, a lot of broad statements about karst, about groundwater, about nitrates. The facts and the science are set forth in the MPCA findings, and they show not only that there will be no negative impact from an expansion, there will be benefit. And I covered that before. I'm not going to go through it again. There is no support in the record for the suggestion that this expansion will have a negative environmental impact. Now, I know staff submitted some proposed factual findings for your consideration. In my memorandum, I also submitted some proposed factual findings that you can consider and use to support the variance. On the whole, again, we believe that this project satisfies each of the criteria. It's consistent with the purpose of the ordinance and consistent with the intent of a variance, and would ask you to grant it. I appreciate all of your time and efforts today and all of the effort that everybody has to give up their afternoon to come and be here. And I know Ben just wanted to say a couple of words, but thank you.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank everyone that made it here, both for and against this variance, and also the Board of Adjustment members. Thank you for listening to us and listening to everybody. I'd also like to thank the staff for putting together the information and put this, lack of a better word, production here on. So thank you from myself and from our family.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Last evening, when I finished reading the second packet of letters, it was up to 173. I was struck by the fact that clearly, the people who spoke here today and the people who wrote the letters have differing opinions about this. But I thought the thing that was so remarkable was the civic engagement that everyone has shown because they care about their community. And I really appreciate the civility everyone has demonstrated here today as well. So thank you. And if we thought it was hard before, now we have another hard part because we have to discuss all the criteria, and then after we have done that, then we will go through them again and decide whether to approve or deny those criteria.
Just Madam Chair, I just want to make sure we're all going to be looking at the same page numbers. I realize we've got multiple from the pack that we received in the mail, from the stuff that was here, and then so.
Good point. Let's see, in the original packet that came out, the original staff report on the 13th, is that the same as what's in the binder?
I'm thinking it is. I'm thinking that we're actually on page 26.
Yeah, it starts on 26. All right. So the first criteria would be the variance request is or is not in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance. Well, okay, this is pretty long staff analysis. While the overall intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance generally supports aspects of the petitioner's proposal, it nonetheless serves to greatly enlarge rather than reduce an existing nonconformity. They are proposing to quadruple the allowable maximum that has been established in the WCZO, the purpose for which is to protect public health, safety, and welfare. A request that is that a request that so substantially exceeds the clear intent and purpose of the ordinance is not in harmony with the ordinance. The following chapters of the WCZO are relevant to this analysis.
Madam Chair, if I might.
Yes.
The synopsis of findings of fact that was reviewed through the legal department is on page 35 of your packet.
Okay.
In case that's useful information.
Not the long one, then. All right. I'll start over. While the overall intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance generally supports aspects of the petitioner's proposal, it nonetheless serves to greatly enlarge rather than reduce an existing nonconformity. They are proposing to quadruple the allowable maximum that has been established in the Winona County zoning ordinance, the purpose for which is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. A request that so substantially exceeds the clear intent and purpose of the ordinance is not in harmony of the ordinance. Do we have discussion with this?
Madam Chair, if I may, after listening to everybody and talking to the petitioner, I think we're at a crossroads in Winona County, and we could conceivably, instead of possibly being the county of no, we could be the county of conservation. And let me expand on that. In the Governor's Water Summit, we heard from some very bright people, and one of the things was Minnesota and Iowa. It was Secretary of Ag from Iowa that said it. If Iowa had all crops protected by cover crops, Iowa would not have a water problem. They believe that strongly. So my thought, if the petitioners, and they said they would provide or concur, we can add things at the end here, what do they call them? Conditions. And this would apply to other farms that might want to come forward too. If we added the condition that we'll grant this, but you're going to have to put 100% of your applicable land in cover crops, we could set ourselves up as the county of conservation in this state and help our water and set an example for others. But that's my thought on that particular issue.
Madam Chair, I guess one of the things that I really wrestled with when I was reading this original packet that was sent out, and I get the feeling in the wording of this that it's because of the quadrupling of the allowable minimum that has been established by the WCZO. And because of that, somehow the public health is not going to be protected, or the safety or their welfare. But yet, we're supposed to look at MPCA as the governing of public health, safety, and welfare. And in their own analysis under number 5, they state that the proposed expansion is consistent with the agricultural character and locale. The MPCA determined that the expansion of dairy farms of Lewiston does not pose a reasonable threat to public health, safety, and welfare. I'm assuming, or I know, that the quadrupling of the numbers were used by the MPCA when they made that ruling. So, in the big picture of things, and if we want to continue to read through other things on the ordinances where we're supposed to be maintaining and sustaining the vitality of family farms, I don't know how much better description of a family farm you can have than what is before us today. So when and if it would be time to vote, I would say that the wording should be changed and that it is in harmony with the intent and purpose of this ordinance.
You know, I'm inclined to look closely at the ordinance, and there are actually two places where it talks about non-conforming farms, and under the non-conforming uses chapter, it does say a lawful non-conforming use shall not be enlarged, but may be continued at the same size and in the same manner of operation as it existed on the date it became legally non-conforming, except as hereinafter specified. And then on another section, also within the ordinance, under livestock feedlots, it said a feedlot is a non-conforming if it is because of excessive animal unit numbers, which exists at the time of the adoption of this ordinance, may continue if the number of animal units does not increase. So I don't see how, I mean, I agree that there were a lot of good reasons to give for why the increase may not be a problem in certain circumstances, but the ordinance is pretty clear. For a non-conforming use, which is what this is. This is not 1,500. This is what, 2,000, almost 3,000 already?
I got to fight over that speaker.
Rachel, did you have? I was going to bring up a different section of the ordinance, so if you want to respond to her, that's fine.
I guess the only way that I would respond to that, Wendy, is the 1,500 animal cap unit is, in my mind, an imaginary line in the sand that means absolutely nothing.
But it's part of the ordinance.
It is part of the ordinance, but there is no scientific data to back up that number.
But it's not our role to change that.
And I would not want to change that. And the reason I would not want to change the animal cap unit for Winona County is because then anybody could come in here and start building, and they would have to circumvent this whole telescope look, as I would call it, to getting a variance of that number. You understand what I'm saying? I don't think that just everybody should be allowed to go over that number. But in this situation, they've already have. And that's the only reason they're non-conforming.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that.
I got a comment about that.
You want to go?
Yeah,
Rachel's been waiting, so.
Okay.
We can wait all day. You can respond, because I'm gonna go to a different section, so if you want to, we'll just make it.
The reason their dairy was built before the ordinance was put in place, right? So they were grandfathered in. So that's not their fault that they're non-conforming. It's like changing the rules after the game is over, But I really believe that they, as far as number one, this is in harmony with a dairy farm that's already there. It's just going to change in size. But like Phil said, the MPCA said that it's not going to be a problem with the water and the manure. In fact, my dad always said, "You're hauling manure, you're making money. Manure has value. We don't want to." I don't know what the city of Winona does with theirs, but we have we put a lot of value on it. 2009, when the price of milk was way below the cost of production, the only thing we did was make some money on manure because we had that for fertilizer, and those are what gets you through some of those years. Go ahead.
I think that it's clear that the MPCA has ruled on the environmental aspect, and I don't think it's reasonable for me to debate the MPCA's decision. It seems like they've got a lot more information and a lot more expertise, and they, as we've talked about, have said that it won't be a problem. But to me, the thing that I have the most trouble with in approving of number one is what Wendy already brought up, that a lawful non-conforming use shall not be enlarged, but also in section 3.2.1, it also says, it is the intent of this section that all non-conformities shall be gradually eliminated and eventually brought into conformity. And so I don't know exactly, it doesn't seem like the ordinance outlined a specific way of making that happen over the last 20 years, but clearly we still have existent nonconformities, and I wonder about that as well. It seems like the intent of the ordinance is that all of the farms in the county would gradually come under that 1,500.
Ironically, if you grant this variance, they will be
in conformity.
In conformity.
It seems to me, Cherie, that I don't like to say bad about anybody, but the county board dropped the ball and they dropped it right in our lap. They were approached to revisit this feedlot issue a couple years ago, and they wouldn't even talk about it, or the majority of them wouldn't even put it on the agenda. So it's in our lap, so I'd say we need to, we will decide, but it's not something that we normally would do. And maybe if we do something, they will eventually discuss and take a look at it. There's new technology out there. We don't drive a car that's 20 years old, at least unless you want to be
yeah, I do.
So, Attorney Nuttall, I think you want to say something.
I did. I just wanted to clarify one point, that it's our position that, but should this be granted, it would not make it legal as a use. It would become a permitted non-conforming use. It would still be a non-conformity, but you would be allowing that to have taken place. So it's not necessarily bringing it into conformity by granting a variance.
Thank you.
Let's go to number two.
Well,
You want to say something? You haven't had a chance to speak on number one.
Criteria 1 specifically deals with the ordinances, and there's several here that are involved. There is, of course, the 1,500 animal unit cap, and there's been, there's convincing reasons why that, may no longer be appropriate, but it is the ordinance as it stands now. And I don't think it's our job. We can't change that. We might grant a variance to one farm to exceed it, but it's not our role, I don't think, to try and change ordinances. I think equally is Chapter 3 on non-conforming uses, which when I read through the document that the Daly's attorneys submitted, you know, they spoke a good deal about the animal unit cap in that, but on non-conforming uses, you know, 3.2.1 is nonconformities will be brought into conformity. 3.2.3.2, nonconforming uses shall not be enlarged. And on to 3.2.4.2, alterations do not expand the building size. They do not increase the nonconformity. And on to 0.5.2, nonconformity may go on, but not expand. And, you know, clearly this variance request doesn't meet that. So that's what I think. It's our job to address the criteria of the ordinance and whether it is or is not in harmony. And I would have to agree with staff and legal that it doesn't. So it's any further discussion? Do you want to go on to number 2? Or do you want to change our pattern and vote on things? How do you want to go
I think we
forward?
should go through them all.
Okay.
If that's okay.
The variance request is or is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. The Winona County Comprehensive Plan generally supports the expansion and preservation of agriculture within the community and recognizes the importance of agriculture in county culture and economic development.
I think we can all agree with that one.
I have a few questions, or at least some concerns. Again, I agree with that, but again, it's the whole idea of balance between agriculture and the environment. And I know the Daly Farm is instituting a lot of, environmental safeguards, but there's still that question of nitrate pollution. Now, I have a question for, I don't know if it's staff, of my understanding about nitrate pollution in the water. I mean, it's pretty high in the Utica Township, but it's also my understanding that you'll get more nitrate pollution from chemical fertilizers than you will from manure. And I don't know if most of the farms in that area use manure or if they use nitrate. Now, I don't know if you know that either, but...
Ross Dunsmore, Environmental Services Supervisor. I work with the well contractors, also a geologist. I don't think the calculations have actually been there to say one way or the other, because trying to account for all inputs, all reductions, I haven't seen in the Pollution Control Agency documents or any documents produced so far for us to be able to say one way or the other. You know, at this time, it appears nitrate is increasing in the shallowest most aquifers. Even within the Jordan Formation with new well construction, drillers are increasing casing depth to seal off the upper Jordan and taking their water out of the lower Jordan, and in doing so they're finding lower nitrate water. So what it seems to suggest is that the upper Jordan is seeing more increasing levels of nitrate. Now, whether that is historic, based on old usage and just, because groundwater moves slowly in many cases, is this an historic influence? Are we still heading up to a peak from an old practice, or is it related to a new practice? We just don't have that information to be able to say one way or the other.
Thank you. Just one other thing in the comprehensive plan, and I think this has been met possibly by the Daly proposal, is it says intense agricultural operations such as a feedlot or a solid waste disposal site should be carefully regulated or prohibited in karst areas. I mean, that's pretty strong language. That's, we'd be taking on faith that it'll be heavily regulated. And it seems, I mean, this is kind of odd, but it seems the fact that they found so many violations before is that it is pretty well regulated. You know, that they'll find, if there are violations, they'll be found. So, I don't know.
When I read through the staff analysis and then the findings, staff agrees that this is consistent with the comprehensive plan. But I was thinking about our training last week, and Attorney Nuttall, when we were going through the variance section of the training, she reminded us when we worked with the comprehensive plan to look at it as a whole and not just the individual parts. And when I read the staff analysis, it talks about that the comprehensive plan supports expansion and preservation of agriculture, which it certainly does. I mean, it is the first part of the comp plan, and it does strongly support agriculture in the county. But there is a very strong emphasis on natural resource protection, which starts on page 30 of the comp plan. It talks on, let's see, goals, protection of all water resources, land management that protects aquifer recharge areas, woodland and forest, bluffs, and agricultural areas. Then there is a section on source water and wellhead protection, page 32. The health, safety, and well-being of all citizens are dependent upon adequate sources of drinking water. The goals being to maintain, protect, and improve the quality of groundwater resources, particularly high-yielding aquifers used for drinking water and connected to surface hydrological features. Under policies, number 4, also page 33, maintain groundwater nitrate level at a point which is equal to or less than the drinking water standard of 10 parts per million or in accordance with state standards. Geology, intense agricultural operations such as feedlot or solid waste disposal sites should be carefully regulated or prohibited in karst areas. There's a section on hydrology. Public health, safety, and welfare are directly linked to the county water supply. It is critical that Winona County protect water quality and quantity. So I just would like to point out that although staff analysis approved this variance because it supports agriculture, which it does, that there is a whole nother part of the comprehensive plan, and I just would like to speak to having balance in that decision. I'm not saying that we should change that decision, but I just would like to put that as part of the findings that the comp plan does strongly protect or support natural resource protection.
I just want to also lift up that if hearing what the Dailies talked about with their intentions and practices of cover cropping and alfalfa and pasture certainly also is very important in terms of protecting groundwater. And I think the county should do everything we can to encourage and support farmers to do those practices that it sounds like the Dailies are already implementing in terms of cover cropping and perennial pasture.
Also, I think the MPCA report also discusses, or at least addresses, the areas where the manure will be spread. And I mean, I know they say that where the Daily Farm currently is and will expand into is not highly susceptible to sinkholes, and that has to do with where the bedrock is and the depth of the soil. And I'm assuming, since the MPCA did not find that they didn't find a problem with the areas that it was going to be that the manure was going to be spread on outside of the farm area. So that's another positive.
Any further discussion on criteria 2? All right, criteria 3. The applicant has not established that there are practical difficulties in complying with the official control and proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner. The applicant's stated reasons for the variance do not support a finding of practical difficulties. That the applicant indicated that they have invested in the property for this expansion and that equipment could be modernized are not practical difficulties. The investments have allowed the property to be used as it is currently, and that use can continue as a legal nonconformity. Modernization of equipment can be done without a variance.
I was just going to say that I don't have a good understanding of the practical difficulties. It's very confusing to me.
Is there a particular point about that that you'd like clarified?
I have a particular question. Can existing facilities and infrastructure count as practical difficulties existing that make the property unique, or can those not be counted?
They can. That would be the physical characteristics. It would be things relating to either the topography or the setbacks and regulations, or the existing facilities can be.
Okay.
It's the other things, the decision making, that it should not be. I think the best description I had of it, and I closed my notes of course, is that it should be characteristics relating to the property as opposed to characteristics relating to the property owner, if that makes sense.
So buildings they built on that specific property are relating to the property?
Yes.
Not related to their motivation, so those could be considered. Okay.
But on the other hand, that's probably the best site because of the topography, because of the depth to bedrock, because of the location near the rest of it, which they talked about, saving the county roads and the state highways that they're and MPCA or whoever does the soil borings must have taken that into consideration. Sometimes I think we forget. We go around, we raise money, we give students scholarships to go to higher institutions, and they learn and they get smart and they come back and they go to work for the MPCA and every place else, and then they make recommendations and we think we know more than they do about these issues. It's a little frustrating.
It's also a little bit vague about what using it in the property in a reasonable manner. I mean, that's rather open to interpretation too. I mean, you could argue that this is an extreme departure from the ordinance or not. I mean, depending on what you think is reasonable.
Looking at the staff's analysis under number 3, they did bring up WCZO chapter 3.2.4.2 about alterations. Alteration and normal maintenance to a lawful non-conforming building or structure may be made, provided the alterations do not expand the building size, the alterations do not change the building occupancy capacity or parking demand, the alteration does not increase the nonconformity of the building or the use. And then goes on to the next 5.2. A nonconformity, including the lawful use or occupation of land or premises existing at the time of the adoption of the official control, may be continued, including through repair, replacement, restoration, maintenance, or improvement, but not including expansion. This is from staff analysis about practical difficulties. So, any further discussion on this one?
Number 4.
The variance request is not due to special conditions or circumstances unique to the property, not created by owners of the property since enactment of the ordinance. Applicant indicates that the existing facilities were completed prior to the adoption of the current regulation and that the unique facts of the property, including the existing facility, were not caused by the applicant since adoption of the ordinance. However, this is not a sufficient distinction from the neighboring properties or properties subject to the same restrictions. The fact that the applicant wishes to expand the current use of the property in ways that others do not is not sufficient. The petitioners have made methodical investments to create economies of scale, which do not relate to the spatial and regulatory land constraints of this particular building site.
Can you define spatial?
Pardon?
Spatial, what does that mean? S-P-A-T-I-A-L.
Spatial?
What?
Having to do with space and how much room it takes up, I should think.
Okay.
Move right into this discussion here.
Well, I would disagree with staff on that one. It seems like this property was built prior to the ordinance. So the special conditions that they have by investing in this property were done before the ordinance was adopted, so that yes, they do have a special condition because that's where it all is.
I know that usually when we come on this one, it's unique to the property is that the setbacks can't be met because of lot size, or there's only one place you can build because of prime soils, or the slopes are too steep. So this is, certainly this is a different than other things we've done.
I guess would be leaning, I think, in the same thinking that Larry is thinking. If the Dailies could pick those buildings up and move them to a more friendlier area, but that's impossible. And those buildings were built prior to the 1,500 animal cap ordinance. You look at their alternatives. Their alternative is to go and start a second dairy if they so wish to milk more cows. And the environmental footprint of having two dairies would put the environment more at risk than if they would just expand the existing one that they have and make it the most efficient one.
I don't expect it's going to get any easier when we come around to this again.
All you got to do is call for a vote.
And maybe we should read a little bit more about the staff analysis on this. We've got, on page 29.
It says, existing facilities were completed prior to the adoption of the current regulation. The unique facts of the property, including the existing facility, were not caused by the applicant since adoption of the ordinance. This is not a sufficient distinction from neighboring properties or properties subject to the same restrictions. The fact that the applicant wishes to expand the current use of the property in ways that others do not is not sufficient. The property is similar to other properties and not unique. It does not constitute special conditions or circumstances. In general, the courts appear to focus on whether or not the property itself differs from neighboring properties and/or properties subject to the same restrictions. I think, and it says, see Winona County Legal Memorandum.
I maybe am stumbling on words, but I would be hard-pressed for you to find a neighbor with a similar property that's milking over 1,500 cows.
I would agree that that's probably true. I suspect that it may refer more to the use or being a dairy rather than about the size, but I'm not staff, so I don't know.
Well, it speaks of property in similar or other properties within the ARC district and not unique. Well, I would beg to differ.
Sri? Just a point of fact, I've been on this board longer than any of you, and this staff analysis is annoying to me, and we didn't used to have that. We used to make the decision based on whatever was written down, and we didn't have the staff telling us their recommendation because it really isn't up to them. It's up to us. And we should interpret the findings of fact based on what we know and what we heard and what's been written down. And this findings of fact and the suggestions from staff, and that's all it is, a suggestion, has been done before today, before we got this additional information. Maybe they'd write it differently if they had to do it over.
I hear you. And it is nice that we have multiple different finding of fact drafts. So we've also have the one from Mr. Berger, is that right? So I've been trying to look at both at the same time and sort of looking at all of our different options, yeah. I think if we're still talking about number 4, to me the big question is about, it was clarified that buildings or infrastructure put on the property prior to the ordinance coming into play can count as those unique characteristics that are that can make number 4 work. And I'm wondering whether the question about whether or not the infrastructure on that specific lot, if that is unique, is it a question of, like, has another dairy farmer somewhere else in the county put a similar amount of money or has a similar size building, or like how can we, if infrastructure can make a property unique, then what is that line of how much investment or how unique does something have to be to make it unique from its neighbors or from other properties? I think that's the thing that I'm sort of stumbling over, is where is that line, and if does anybody have any insights?
Define unique, I guess.
Madam Chair, can you hear me all right?
Project there, Eric.
Just talk about maybe 3 and 4. The one thing that would be unique as far as the existing infrastructure buildings is that I believe this operation is the only operation that we have in Winona County that was over the 1,500 animal units prior to the adoption of the ordinance. So in that light, it is unique in that there's only one existing operation that is at that level at this point in time.
I guess that was just the point that I was going to make. I mean, you have no neighbor to compare it to. So, I mean, I would think that would be unique.
Yeah.
The variance will not alter the essential character of the locality, nor substantially impair property values or the public health, safety, or welfare in the vicinity. Criteria 5. Utica Township is primarily an agricultural district, so the proposed expansion would be consistent with the character of the locale. Although public concerns have been raised as to health, safety, and welfare, particularly as it relates to groundwater contamination and usage, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency found that there are no potentially significant environmental effects reasonably expected as a result of this project. The conditions attached to the variance, if granted, would provide protections to the public health, safety, and welfare in the vicinity. Discussion?
I can concur with that.
I mean, the dairy farm is certainly zoned for agriculture, but the expansion to 6,000 animals would certainly alter the essential character of the locality, wouldn't it? I mean, the impacts on neighboring properties in agricultural areas, I think, depend largely on the size and scale of a farm, of a neighboring farm. That would certainly affect, I mean, in some regards. And also there are, I understand, over 20 homes that are within a mile of the dairy farms. And there is a potential for property value to be impacted because there have been numerous studies conducted, and one in particular from the Appraisal Journal, which is a leading professional publication for property appraisers. They found that large animal facilities will reduce neighboring property values at from 3 to 26%, depending on factors such as proximity, age of the house, and practices utilized by the operation to control nuisance conditions. So it might not be at the 26% level, but that still addresses the issue of property values.
We didn't have any speakers today talk about that or complain about that or bring that up at all. I'm not sure. That might be a question for our assessor or recorder.
It was in one of the letters.
One of the letters?
It was, yes, it was.
From the golf course.
It's in the findings. It was submitted in the first packet.
So there was one?
Was that the one from the golf course?
Pardon?
Was that the letter from the golf course?
No. The letter, there was a letter from a neighbor who has property for sale, and he expressed concerns regarding loss of property value in the event of an expansion. That was in the second packet of letters.
That is the golf course owner.
I'm sorry?
That is the owner of the golf course that wrote that letter. Yeah, so the writer of that letter owns the golf course that's near, I think it's called the Lewiston Country Club. Yeah. But I do think we have heard from, it sounds like, I have not heard any immediate residential neighbor of the Dailies express concern. It seems like they have a lot of local support.
I would say that they have enormous local support.
One comment about the MPCA monitoring of the air quality. They don't cover everything. I mean, and there is more recently some major studies, international studies have been done on the negative effect of airborne antibiotic resistant genes. Now, they don't use a lot of antibiotics, so it might not be a big problem. But just to note that not everything was covered by the MPCA's. I mean, and that's indoor air quality. I mean, they found that indoor air quality in areas where there are large feedlots where antibiotics are used to a fairly large extent, the indoor air quality can be actually quite dangerous, because with the antibiotic-resistant bacteria. It can lead, they said, to like, you know, it's the superbugs basically, like Musa. But again, if they're not using a lot of antibiotics, that shouldn't be a problem. It sounds like they don't. So, but that was one thing that came up. One other concern I had was that the fact that John Linkstein of the MPCA has directed the Environmental Quality Board to do that generic EIS for the southeast Minnesota because of the karst topography. It's a sort of a recognition that their water pollution standards are not sufficient. And even in his quote that we now have more data about groundwater contamination than we've had in the past, and once you know something, you should act on it on the basis of it, and not say that one more cut after 1,000 is acceptable. So the fact that he directs the EQB to do a generic EIS for this area says something about the MPCA's not being all that comfortable with that they've covered everything. That's just, I don't know how else you'd read that.
I thought about that as well, that it somewhat casts doubt on the statement that there's no potentially significant environmental effects. I did want, although staff recommends approving or does approve this criteria, I think because of the number of letters and speakers who spoke to water quality concerns, that I just want to recognize that the Department of Agriculture's well testing findings, which have been mentioned numerous times, that both Lewiston and Utica municipal water has challenges with nitrates. And in the DNR's preliminary well approval, they did say the proposed rate and volume may interfere with other water uses. I think this might have been mentioned earlier when the Winona County Soil and Water Conservation District had a cautionary that verbal agreements may not be strong enough, and maybe that's been dealt with by the Dailies. And that a concern that with 15 acres of new impervious surfaces, the increased rainfall amounts and intensities over recent years, the designing permanent treatment to control only 1 inch of volume from the project site may not be adequate. I also went through the Winona County Comprehensive Local Water Management Plan, and their priority concerns are protecting groundwater, addressing the Clean Water Act, and protecting surface waters. Their goal being all Winona County residents should have access to safe drinking water. So, although staff recommends approval of this particular criteria, I do think that needs to be part of the findings, since it's been mentioned so many times. Any further discussion on this one? I think that means we're up to criteria 6. Economic considerations are the only claimed practical difficulties. It must be shown that economic considerations alone do not constitute practical difficulties. In order to satisfy this factor, the applicants would need to show that economic considerations were not the sole basis for their variance application. However, the stated grounds for the expansion are exclusively economic considerations. The applicant stated that providing jobs for additional family members and supporting others making a living by farming in the area is a primary reason for the variance request. Other stated grounds include operational economic efficiencies and receiving benefits for the investments already made in the facility, which are also economic considerations. Therefore, the applicant has not met this criteria. Discussion?
Okay, speaking as someone who has been hurt twice in my life on the farm, which can be a dangerous occupation, especially with cattle, I look at the fact that promoting food safety and ensured continued safety and well-being of the Daly family and employees is not an economic consideration, it's a humane consideration. And there's so much better facilities and cattle handling things nowadays than there used to be. And cattle are a little bigger than they used to be. The older facilities, a milking parlor was built in 1959. It was made for 1,250-pound cows. We built a new facility in 1995 that was made for 1,500-pound cows. Now we have cows that are 1,800 pounds. And I don't know is that you can change that. You have to adapt to the cattle that we breed and create that give more milk so people can have a healthier, cheaper product and we can still make a buck. But I disagree with staff on this one because of that reason.
Well, I guess I would just reiterate a little of what Larry was speaking of. I mean, the advances in the technology that we have for cow comfort, environment that she lives in, breathes in, feeds in, and is exposed in. We've made great strides in manure handling, manure applications. I don't want to say what we were doing 20 years ago was all wrong, but I do believe that we've greatly improved upon a lot of areas, and a new facility would definitely be a plus for the environment as well as the people and the cattle that are being housed there and people that work there.
Well, they could still do that on their existing facility, right? They could modernize?
Not really, no.
If you're talking certain things, yes, you could. But if you're talking about size of cow and expanding the size of the stalls that are provided for her to lay down in and stuff, that would be very difficult for that to be achieved.
Is that something that is that part of the plan, is to make the stalls larger for larger animals? We can maybe make a little list of questions and ask him to answer some questions at the end. Does that make sense? Or not? I don't know if it matters, but I don't know if that's...
Criteria 7. The variance can be alleviated by a reasonable method other than a variance and is the minimum variance which would alleviate the practical difficulty. The variance requested is the maximum variance that could be supported by the applicant's land and building capacities, not the minimum that would alleviate the practical difficulties. In addition, there are reasonable alternatives to obtaining a variance at this point. The increase in total animal units owned by the applicant could be spread out among other sites so as to not exceed ordinance restrictions, though this would prove less economically feasible for the applicant and could potentially cause more environmental and infrastructure impacts in Winona County than the consolidated site would. Applicants could also seek to have the ordinance changed to allow for operations such as the one proposed, either by removing / raising the animal unit maximum or establishing additional performance standards for feedlots of this magnitude.
I think the staff's answer to this is actually a little comical because they tell you that they can alleviate this by building multiple sites, but then they also go on and tell us that that could be less environmentally friendly, and I thought that that's what the whole zoning ordinance and comp plan is about, is to have the least impact on the environment. It really makes no sense to, can they do that? Yeah. Would they do that? I don't think so. I just don't know that that would even be considered a good steward of the land to force them to go and build 2 facilities.
I agree with Phil.
I do agree with the, I think that the staff's analysis that this proposal is not the minimum that would alleviate the practical difficulties, and that this is not the minimum variance requested, which I think is what, as we try to follow these ordinances, that's what as we're granting variances, we're trying to bring about variances that are the least amount of a departure from the ordinance. That's my understanding.
I believe in the application, the Dalys mentioned this, we could have multiple farms, but that's not economically feasible. That was mentioned before. I think elsewhere in here, we did see staff, in this original staff analysis, they mentioned modernization could happen without it being at this particular scale. Any further discussion on this? Criteria 8. The request is not a use variance and does not have the effect of allowing any use that is not allowed in the zoning district, permit a lower degree of flood protection than the regulatory flood protection elevation, or permit standards lower than those required by state law. The request is not a use variance because a legal nonconformity is a use allowed in the zoning district. The request would not lower the degree of flood protection or lessen state law standards.
If it floods at Daley's, we're all in trouble.
Pardon?
If it floods at Daley's, we're all in trouble.
Indeed.
So I think we don't have to talk about this one.
So we need to go through them again now and vote on them. Are we ready? Oh, did you have a question for Mr. Hale? Okay.
I don't think it's that important.
Is there any further discussion, any questions or things we need to talk about? All right, criteria 1. The variance request is or is not in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance.
I believe it is.
Maybe
I'll second that. Let's vote on it and move on. Are we going to vote on each one? Is that what we're going to do?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's where we're at. We're at voting now. So, as proposed by staff and our legal department, it is the variance request is not in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance. We discussed it earlier. So I would say, how do we say this?
Everybody say aye. Phil, you made the motion. Tell them what you said.
No,
I believe the variance request is in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance.
And I second it. I call the question.
All right, so let's vote on that then. Do we agree that the variance request is in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance. All in favor with that, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Nay. Criteria 2, the variance request is or is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. Sorry?
Before you move on, I just want to make sure you know what you're doing, which is that if my understanding is correct, that motion just failed, which means there's no motion relating to criteria 1 out there. There's no approval of one way or another, if that was your intention.
Say that one more time louder.
So the motion was to make it is in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance.
Right.
That motion failed.
Okay.
So now there's no motion relating to criteria 1. If you intend to vote on each criteria in order to make your findings, you would need to continue with criteria 1. And then make sure that the information in the analysis is there as you wish for it to be.
Okay, so now
I would make a motion on criteria 1 that the variance request is not in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance.
do we have a second on that?
I'll second.
All in favor of the motion as proposed, the variance request is not in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay.
Nay.
So this motion has passed. And criteria 1 is not met.
You should also ensure that the analysis after that, the reasoning behind that decision is clear the way that the board would like to make its findings.
So then I'd like to make a motion to use the language in our draft findings of fact provided by staff for our final finding of fact.
Is there a second to that?
I second.
All in favor of that, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Nay.
Nay, Madam Chair, point of order. The chair is only supposed to vote in case of a tie, so you should withhold your vote until we four vote, and then you can vote after that.
I don't think that's actually in the proceedings.
That is not the case the way that our, let's see, find it in here. I looked this up not that long ago.
She can't make a motion or second. She can vote.
It says in 2.3 of the Rules of Procedure of the Board of Adjustment that the chairperson shall not move for action or second a motion, but may vote on any issue if they wish, and must vote in case of a tie. So she is allowed to vote if she chooses to.
Okay. Same end result, I guess.
Pardon?
Same end result.
So, let's see. That was kind of cumbersome.
Number 2.
All right. The variance request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, is how this is in the findings of fact. Do we wish to accept this as proposed?
I'd make a motion to accept it as proposed.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Right. Rachel has moved and Phil has seconded to accept criteria 2 as proposed. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay. All right. Criteria 2 is accepted. Do we need to read that again, Stephanie?
Did that include
The analysis?
That was her motion.
That was my motion.
Okay. All right. Criteria 3. The applicant has not established that there are practical difficulties in complying with the official control and proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner. Do we wish to accept this as proposed by staff and legal?
I believe that the applicant has established that there are practical differences.
Second. Was that a motion, Phil? Second.
All right. So then we would be voting that the applicant has established there are practical difficulties. All in favor of that, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay.
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 Nay. So that motion fails. So now, do we have a motion that would read, the applicant has not established that there are practical difficulties in complying with the official control and proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner?
I so move.
I can second that.
Motion by Wendy and second by Rachel. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay.
Nay.
Right. Criteria 3 has passed as the applicant has not established there are practical difficulties. Do we adopt the stated reasons from staff with this?
I'll make a motion to adopt the stated reasons by staff.
I second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay.
Nay.
Criteria 4. The variance request is not due to special conditions or circumstances unique to the property, not created by owners of the property since enactment of the ordinance.
You keep shooting me down, so I don't know if I should make the motion or not. But I believe the variance request is due to special conditions and circumstances unique to the property.
Second.
All in favor of the motion as made by Phil and seconded by Larry, say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, say nay. So are we accepting? We wouldn't then. Let's see. So we would be, this, we've just made a criteria that says the variance request is due to special conditions.
Right.
We need to probably flesh that out a bit in the findings.
I think we can go to number 5.
Pardon?
I think we can go to number 5 now, right?
No, I think we have to do this.
We have to, have justification for our decision.
Yes.
I think that my reason for going against the staff recommendation was that the existing facilities make that property unique. And there is language provided by Mr. Berger. If people want to look at that, do you guys have that in front of you?
I do.
It might be a shortcut to use that. Is it appropriate to do that?
What page is that?
It's just in the, I don't know, I took it out of the binder so I could look at it. It says 18 on it, but I don't know 18 of what thing.
It says economic conditions are not the sole motivation behind daily farms
wrong
proposed
one.
project. That's number 6.
Yeah, we're doing number 4.
We're still on 4?
Yeah. I can read it out loud and make a motion. So I'm going to make a motion to adopt the language used by the proposed finding of facts presented by Mr. Berger at today's hearing. That reads, The location of substantial existing facilities on Daly Farms property, which are immobile, necessary to the dairy operation, and not present on most other property in the area, constitutes a circumstance that is unique to the property and was not created by Daly Farms since the adoption of the 1,500 animal unit cap in the ordinance. Further, construction of separate facilities on different properties would create significant economic costs as well as non-economic costs such as increased traffic and fossil fuel. I would like to propose that wording, but I would like to omit the last sentence because I don't necessarily think it's necessary, but if people can debate me on that if they want.
Would you mind reading that one more time?
You want me to read it again? So my proposal would be the location of substantial existing facilities on the Daly Farms property, which are immovable, necessary to the dairy operation, and not present on most other properties in the area, constitutes a circumstance that is unique to the property and was not created by Daly Farms since the adoption of the 1,500 animal unit cap in the ordinance.
What's the part about since the ordinance? Was it before the ordinance?
I think this is saying that those buildings and infrastructure were in place prior to the ordinance.
Thank you.
And I don't know, I have nothing to verify that except for this wording.
Eric would know.
Yeah, the ordinance came in effect in '98.
And those buildings are older?
Yeah.
Right. So do we wish to accept this as the findings on number 4 then?
So I have made a motion. I don't know if it's been seconded.
All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Now, criteria 5. The variance will not alter the essential character of the locality, nor substantially impair property values or the public health, safety, or welfare in the vicinity.
Can we just agree with staff on that one and vote to yes? I'll make that motion.
What are you doing now?
Number 5.
He made a motion
Yes
to
or no?
accept number 5 as it's written by staff.
Oh, I'll second that then.
It's not even 6:30 yet. Come on. All right. So we have a motion and a second to accept criteria 5 as staff has proposed. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Nay. So we do in fact accept number 5 as staff has proposed along with their findings. Criteria 6. Economic considerations are the only claimed practical difficulties. It must be shown that economic considerations alone do not constitute practical difficulties.
I'd like to make a motion to accept 6 as written by staff, including the analysis.
I second that.
All in favor of accepting number 6 as written by the staff along with the findings, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Criteria 6 has been moved and voted to be accepted as written. Criteria 7. The variance can be alleviated by a reasonable method other than a variance and is the minimum variance which would alleviate the practical difficulty.
I personally feel the variance cannot be alleviated by a reasonable method.
Is that a motion?
There really are no reasonable alternatives to the variance. While Daly Farms could, in theory, spread its operation out over multiple separate sites, this would potentially cause more environmental and infrastructure impacts than expanding the site would. Further, that is, as is the case, With any variance application, a theoretical alternative of seeking to have the ordinance changed is not sufficient basis for denying the variance request. In addition, Daily Farms request variance is the minimum variance under the applicable standard.
I have a question about this. It says, it talks about if it can be, if there's a reasonable method other than a variance that is the minimal variance which would alleviate the practical difficulty. Didn't we vote that there wasn't a practical difficulty?
We discussed, but we didn't really.
I mean, on number 3, what?
No, we adopted that as staff found that there are not practical difficulties.
Right. So if there's not a practical difficulty, how can we vote on something that would alleviate it? Or not?
Make it more confusing.
Yeah, well, I'm confused.
All right, we are on criteria 7. As staff recommends, I'm not sure where we are in terms of motions and seconds. Shall we adopt this then as staff written, or?
Was there already a motion to?
Oh, I have the motion on the floor, Cherie, that
Oh, yeah.
variance
Okay.
cannot be.
Yes, we have
All
to
right.
vote on that motion.
And it's been
I
seconded.
second it.
All right. Okay. So, all in favor of the motion as proposed by Phil and seconded by Larry, say aye.
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 All opposed say nay.
Nay.
Nay. So this variance, and so now you need to have findings with this, as this variance is not passed as written in the findings of fact.
I'm going to say that we're going to use,
Yeah, microphone.
there is no reasonable alternative to the variance. While Daily Farms could, in theory, spread its operation out over multiple sites, this would probably cause more environmental and infrastructure impacts than the expanded site would. Further, there is, as in the case with any variance, a theoretical alternative to seeking to have the ordinance changed is not a sufficient basis for denying the variance request. In addition, Daily Farms' request variance is the minimum variance under the applicable standard.
Do we need a motion on that?
Could you read that again? I'm sorry. I just need to make sure I'm clear here.
There is no reasonable alternative to the variance. While Daily Farms could, in theory, spread its operation out over multiple sites, this would potentially cause more environmental and infrastructure impacts than the expanded site would. Further, there is, as is the case with any variance application, a theoretical alternative of seeking to have the ordinance changed is not a sufficient basis for denying the variance request. In addition, Daily Farms' request variance is a minimum variance under the applicable standard.
I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that at all.
Doesn't matter.
Pardon?
I don't know if it matters. You passed it already.
No, not the finding, we have to adopt the finding.
Well, you asked me to provide you the findings, and I just did.
Right. You'd have to vote to accept those. Right.
Madam Chair, can you please speak into the microphones for the record?
Oh, sorry.
It seems to me that the motion passed to, but not the language after. Like,
correct.
There needs to be a separate motion to accept the language written in the findings of fact for the record. Is that correct?
Yes,
So move.
that's where we're at.
So you're moving to accept the language that was read just now.
You second that,
Is there a
Phil?
second on that?
Sure, I second it.
So all in favor of accepting the language as proposed by Phil in this motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Nay. So I think we've just accepted the language.
Am I out of order to ask a question about that variance? Where it says the variance cannot be alleviated by a reasonable method other than a variance? What does that mean?
It should be that the need for a variance cannot be alleviated by anything but getting a variance.
Okay.
Number 8. Number 8.
No, I'm just not sure how that vote went, because I couldn't hear Wendy. So did that vote pass?
I wasn't listening. Wendy, did you, you approved it?
I approved it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that one did pass.
Then the language in number 7 has been accepted. Then criteria 8, the request is not a use variance and does not have the effect of allowing any use that is not allowed in the zoning district, permit a lower degree of flood protection than the regulatory flood protection elevation, or permit standards lower than those required by state law.
I'll make a motion to accept criteria 8 as written by staff.
Second.
Moved by Rachel and seconded by Larry. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Nay. Criteria 8 is adopted as written by staff. Now, so based on the foregoing findings, I think we might need to review these, because we changed 2 of them. However,
I make a motion we approve the variance.
With or without conditions?
With the conditions of the petitioner would need to have cover crops on all applicable land based by the Lewiston Soil Conservation Service, as long as they milk cows there.
There are conditions
there,
in the packet that I'm thinking are applicable.
there, I think that, as I understand this here, if any of these criteria fail, we cannot approve this variance request. And there are several of these criteria were not approved. Number 1, number 3. I'm sorry? What?
I would beg to differ. You voted yes for number 1. You approved number 1.
No, we did not. Variance, criteria 1 was voted that it is not in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance.
So what did you vote on that tree?
Pardon?
What was your vote for number 1, yay or nay?
Aye.
Yeah, so you voted yes for it. You didn't vote no for it.
Madam Chair, would you like me to address this?
Please.
The votes relating to criteria 1, the first motion was that the request is in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance. That motion failed on a 2-3 vote. The next motion was that the proposal is not in harmony with intent and purpose of the ordinance, and that motion carried 3-2 in favor. So what passed is that it is not in favor, and then these draft findings were approved.
So then just for clarification, that was a yes vote, was not a no vote.
That was a vote to adopt what was presented in the draft findings.
For number one,
Correct.
that it is not in harmony with the intent and purpose of the ordinance.
Correct.
We got a motion on the floor. Is there a second, or can we go home soon?
I'll second it.
I'm not sure. It's very clear, and I believe it's chapter 5, that if any of the criteria fail, the variance can't be approved. So I'm not sure that we can do that.
Then vote against it.
Attorney Nuttall, how is this best handled?
I would draw your, I think you can go ahead and vote on it, but I would draw your attention to the second paragraph at the top of your draft findings of fact that's on top of all of them that says, if any one element is voted no in the majority, then the criteria for granting a variance per Minnesota statute section 394.27 has not been met, and the variance as requested should be denied.
And I'm saying that they voted yes for number one. They did not vote no.
Voted yes for it not to be.
And just to clarify, this is to vote to approve the entirety of the variance based on the 8 criteria.
Right, so we do have this motion on the floor to approve the variance with the votes that we've taken. And we have a second as well. Although, as our attorney has pointed out, this doesn't meet Ordinance 5.6.2. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Nay.
Nay.
So, based on the foregoing findings, the Winona County Board of Adjustment, I need a motion here.
My motion failed, so now you need to have another motion to deny. I would suggest to the chair.
I'm sorry, say that again.
My motion failed,
Yes?
so now you need another motion to deny.
Yes, I know.
I'll make a motion to deny the variance.
I second.
We have a motion by Rachel and a second by Wendy to deny the variance. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay.
Nay.
So this petition, docket BOA 2/21/1901, has not passed or been approved. All decisions by the Board of Adjustment in granting variances or in hearing appeals from any administrative order, requirement, decision, or determination shall be final, except that any aggrieved person or persons or any department, board, or commission of the jurisdiction or of the state shall have the right to appeal within 30 days after receipt of notice of the decision to the district court in the county in which the land is located on questions of law and fact. Any party that would like to submit an appeal to the decision rendered at the public hearing must do so to the district court. Planning and Environmental Services is not responsible for filing the appeal or obtaining representation by counsel for the petitioner.
Madam Chairman, I move we adjourn.
Moved by Larry, seconded by Rachel. All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.